8 ton. Karen's daughter didn't borrow my RZR. She stole it like she was entitled to everything within eyesight, like the neighborhood was her personal showroom, and my property was just another thing she could take without asking or paying or respecting a single boundary. She marched onto my driveway with the same smug smirk I'd seen on her mother every punch she shoved a violation notice into some terrified neighbor's hands, and in that moment I understood exactly how entitlement is inherited. It's taught, modeled, celebrated, and then unleashed. She didn't flinch when I told her to leave. She didn't pause when I made it clear that she was trespassing. She looked me dead in the eye, reached into my garage, grabbed the spare key she had absolutely no right to even know about, and slid into the driver's seat of the machine I had rebuilt bolt by bolt, with my own hands like she was mounting a throne. Before we move forward, drop a comment and tell me where you're watching from, and what time it is right now. She twisted the key like it was already hers, like ownership was just a feeling instead of a legal reality. And when the engine roared to life under her, what I heard wasn't horsepower. I heard the sound of years of unchecked HOA arrogance screaming full volume. She didn't even look back at me when she floored it. She didn't apologize. She didn't acknowledge the theft, the trespass, the violation. She just gunned it down the street like she thought she was untouchable, like her last name was a shield against consequences, like Pine Ridge Estates was still a kingdom, and she was still its princess. And in that instant, watching my RZR disappear with the daughter of the woman who had turned our neighborhood into a petty dictatorship, I didn't shout. I didn't chase. I didn't perform anger for her. I went cold. The kind of cold that doesn't waste energy. The kind of cold that calculates. The kind of cold that ends tyrants. Because this wasn't about a stolen machine anymore. This was about a pattern of domination that started with HOA letters and golf cart patrols, and ended with a girl thinking she could walk into my garage, take my property, and joyride through the streets without a single consequence scratching the paint of her life. I pulled out my phone, opened my cameras, and there it was. Crystal clear footage of entitlement in motion, time-stamped, undeniable. The story of their downfall, already written in pixels. Madison steps across my driveway. Madison entering my garage without permission. Madison taking the key she never had a right to touch. Madison starting the engine. Madison fleeing with a grin. Evidence is silent, but it is ruthless. And I knew instantly that this time Karen's little kingdom of intimidation and fake authority wasn't going to bury anything. The sirens hadn't even started yet, but I could already hear the sound of her throne cracking. I followed at a distance, not as a victim chasing a thief, but as a witness collecting the last pieces of proof I needed to end an era. She drove like she lived, reckless, performative, unchecked. She swerved, laughed, filmed herself, acted like the road was a stage and everyone else was an extra in the Duke family show. Then entitlement finally met gravity. She took a corner too fast, the RZR tipped, snapped back down, fishtailed, and lunged toward an elderly man walking his dog, clipping him hard enough to throw him to the grass while she fought the wheel like reality was an insult. The sound that followed was metal, asphalt, and consequences colliding, and for the first time since I'd moved into Pine Ridge, the neighborhood was looking at the Dukes not with fear, but with horror. Sirens closed in. Red and blue lights painted the street where Karen had once driven her golf cart like a crown. Madison sat frozen in the seat she'd stolen, shock erasing every ounce of smugness from her face. And then the white SUV slammed to a stop. Karen Duke stepped out, fury shaking her voice, screaming accusations at everyone but the person responsible, pointing at me like I was the problem because tyrants believe truth is whatever they say it is. She shouted about harassment and vendettas and lies until I held up my phone and let the footage speak louder than she ever could. Her words died, her face drained. She knew that for the first time in her reign the narrative wasn't hers to write. The officers didn't ask for her opinion, they asked for my video. They didn't bow to her position, they read her daughter her rights. The cuffs clicked shut, not just around Madison's wrists, but around the illusion of immunity the Dukes had lived inside for years. Neighbors gathered, not cowering, not apologizing, but watching the end they had been waiting for in silence. Karen tried to step forward, tried to bark orders like it was still an HOA meeting she could bully through, and the officer's warning cut through the air with surgical precision. Step back or be detained. That was the sound of the crown falling. That was the moment the queen of the neighborhood realized she had never actually ruled anything beyond fear. Madison was guided into the cruiser, eyes wide, lip trembling, the queen in training suddenly just another person who had to answer to laws she'd been raised to believe didn't apply to her. Karen looked smaller with every breath, shrinking under the weight of witnesses, reports, and the undeniable clarity of video truth. The neighbors didn't defend her. They didn't shield her. They didn't avert their eyes. They spoke. Years of swallowed anger spilled out in calm, steady voices, describing fines, threats, trespasses, humiliation, and the long list of lines she had crossed long before today. And through it all, I didn't raise my voice once. I didn't have to. Consequences were finally doing what the HOA never had the courage to do. The cops didn't care about titles. The law didn't care about Karen's binder or her threats or her reputation. Madison's Queen of the Neighborhood act ended in the back of a squad car, and Karen's reign cracked in front of the people she'd spent years training to fear her. I watched her realize she couldn't rewrite this, couldn't bury it under paperwork, couldn't bully it into silence. Her daughter had stolen my RZR. Her daughter had trespassed in my garage. Her daughter had endangered lives. And every second of it was recorded, witnessed, documented, and irreversible. She whispered that I had done this to her, that I had no idea what she could still do, but the truth was right there in front of us both. For the first time in Pine Ridge Estates, Karen couldn't do anything. Not to me, not to the police, not to the truth, not to the handcuffs on her daughter's wrists. The kingdom she had built on intimidation was collapsing in the only way tyrannies ever really collapse: publicly, inevitably, and with no dramatic speech to save them. And while the neighborhood stood there in the cool echo of fading sirens, one fact settled heavier than any of her threats ever had. The Duke's reign ended right there, not with applause, not with forgiveness, not with noise, but with the cold, quiet click of consequences finally catching up. Before Madison ever laid her hands on my RZR, before the sirens, before the handcuffs, before the perfect little kingdom of Pine Ridge Estates finally cracked under the weight of its own arrogance, there was the slow, steady build-up that made everything inevitable. None of this started with an engine turning over or a spoiled girl stealing what didn't belong to her. It began the day I moved here and made the single greatest mistake you can make in an HOA-controlled neighborhood. I refused to kneel. When Pam and I first arrived, we weren't looking for conflict. We were looking for quiet. We had spent years grinding in neighborhoods where noise replaced peace, where safety was something you hoped for instead of expected, where the idea of a workshop and space to build something with your own hands sounded like fantasy instead of a basic right. Pine Ridge Estates looked like a promise when we first drove in. Manicured lawns, identical mailboxes, cul-de-sacs lined with trees planted in perfect HOA-approved symmetry. We thought we were buying calm. What we didn't know was that we were also buying surveillance, control, and a queen who believed everyone inside the gates existed purely to confirm her importance. Karen introduced herself before our boxes were even off the truck. Not as a neighbor, not as a person, as an authority. Clipboard tucked to her chest like body armor, rulebook wedged under her arm like scripture. She smiled the way people smile when they're already planning which rule they'll hit you with first. She didn't ask where we were from or what brought us here. She asked about paint colors, exterior finishes, garage contents, vehicle counts, compliance forms. That was the welcome to Pine Ridge Estates. No warmth, no humanity. Just an audit you didn't know you'd signed up for. She spoke in rules instead of sentences, in violations instead of conversations. And right then I saw what everyone else in the neighborhood had already learned to fear. But fear and I have never gotten along. My background isn't loud. It isn't something I brag about at block parties or shove in people's faces to win arguments. My authority comes from years of training, years of procedure, years of learning how to document, how to build airtight cases, how to remain calm when other people try to control situations they don't understand. I've worked in environments where emotion gets people hurt and evidence is the only language that matters. That's what I brought with me when I came to Pine Ridge, and that's exactly what Karen hated most. She could intimidate people who argued. She couldn't intimidate people who didn't need to. The RZR didn't start as a symbol of resistance. It started as a project, a wrecked machine, half forgotten and half destroyed, that I took apart piece by piece and rebuilt because there's something deeply satisfying about bringing dead metal back to life. Every bolt I tightened, every line I rewired, every cracked part I replaced came from hours of patience, focus, and earned skill. It wasn't loud rebellion. It was craftsmanship. But dictators don't fear noise. They fear independence. And Karen saw my garage as independence, a place outside her control, a space she couldn't regulate with her clipboard or invade without getting caught trespassing on something that wasn't hers. She hated that the RZR existed because she hadn't approved it, hadn't signed off on it, hadn't controlled the process that built it. Power is addictive, and Karen was overdosed on it long before I ever arrived. She called community standards what was really her personal taste. She called safety concerns what was actually nosy interference. She called protecting property values what was actually controlling human beings. And while she pushed paper violations into mailboxes like threats in envelopes, her daughter watched it all from the passenger seats of that ridiculous HOA golf cart, like a princess learning how to rule. Madison didn't just wake up entitled. She was trained like that. She watched her mother talk to grown adults like children. She watched people twice Karen's age lower their eyes when she drove past. She heard apologies from people who had done nothing wrong and saw fines punish people who had simply lived normally. What did she learn from that? That rules don't apply to the crown, that power is inherited, that Pine Ridge didn't belong to its residents, it belonged to the dukes. My mistake, in her eyes, was simple. I didn't treat them like royalty. I minded my business. I restored what I owned. I fixed what was broken. I refused to cower when Karen's little love letters of intimidation showed up taped to my front door. And every time I responded calmly, legally, and with documents instead of fear, Karen's smile got tighter, and Madison's curiosity sharpened. The first time Madison really looked at the RZR, I saw something cold in her eyes. Not admiration, not interest, possession. The belief that if she wanted it, it would eventually be hers one way or another, by rule, by threat, or by outright taking it. She called it a violation. She repeated her mother's language like a script, as if saying the word enough times turned my property into hers. Every time she drove past, she slowed down, staring not at me, but at what I'd built, and that stare told me everything about the way she'd been raised. HOA power had convinced her that consequences were for other people. That's where my authority came in. Not the loud, bragging kind, not the waving papers in your face kind, but the steady, quiet, procedural kind. The kind that understands how evidence works. The kind that knows when to stay silent and when to act. The kind that doesn't need permission from a neighborhood tyrant to protect what's his. Karen believed she ran Pine Ridge because no one had ever challenged the story she told about herself. She believed president meant untouchable. She believed bylaws were weapons instead of guidelines. She believed fear was loyalty. Madison believed it too. But laws don't bend for clipboards. And reality doesn't bow to people who are only powerful because everyone around them is tired of fighting. So by the time Madison walked up my driveway with that smirk and those inherited delusions, the ending was already written. She thought she was confronting a neighbor. She was actually walking straight into someone who understood documentation, chain of custody, criminal liability, and how fast fake authority collapses under real accountability. My backstory wasn't loud speeches or flashing badges. It was years learning exactly how to stay calm while other people lost control. It was discipline. It was patience. It was knowing that when tyrants overstep, the best retaliation isn't noise, it's precision. And that's why when she stole my RZR, when she pretended my garage was hers to walk into, when she treated my work like her toy, I didn't chase or scream or play the game she expected. I did exactly what people like Karen and Madison fear most. I stayed calm. I documented everything. I let them write their own ending with their own arrogance. And step by step, engine roar by engine roar, that ending led in only one direction, away from fantasy thrones and toward the sound of handcuffs closing in silence. Pine Ridge Estates pretended to be a community, but underneath the matching mailboxes and manicured lawns, it functioned like a small, well-oiled machine built entirely for one purpose: to keep HOA Karen on the throne she carved for herself, out of fear, fines, and fabricated authority. The rules weren't written to protect property values. They were written to protect her ego. Every committee, every subboard, every task force existed as a layer of insulation between her decisions and the consequences she never expected to face. She chaired meetings not to listen, but she didn't ask for input. She announced outcomes and dared anyone to challenge her while Madison sat near, absorbing every ounce of that warped lesson in power like a royal apprentice waiting for coronation. The board members were chosen carefully, not for competence, but for obedience. People who liked attention, people who hated conflict, people who were too timid or too indebted to do anything except nod at whatever HOA Karen declared to be for the good of the neighborhood. She kept them in place with the same tactic she used on residents: selective enforcement. If a board member stayed loyal, their weeds never counted, their holiday lights were never non-compliant, and their driveway cracks were magically invisible. But the second anyone questioned her, envelopes appeared on their doors like warnings from a ghost, reminding them that Karen didn't just run meetings, she ran lives. Fines became her currency, threats became her language, silence became the tax people paid to avoid becoming the next example. And through it all, Madison watched, learned, practiced, and sharpened her smirk into a weapon. The abuse of power wasn't loud at first. It crept, a warning here, a friendly reminder there, a casual mention that non-compliance can affect your standing with the HOA. Then came the certified letters, the late fees, the liens, the whispered comments about how someone wasn't a good fit for Pine Ridge standards. Karen rewrote the culture until people policed themselves out of fear of being noticed. Neighbors didn't talk to one another. They monitored one another, waiting to see who would be targeted next. The HOA newsletters became sermons, each paragraph dripping with condescension dressed up as community care, and every resident who read them understood the same message between the lines: fall in line or get crushed. And the more Karen got away with, the bolder Madison became. She stopped pretending to be a bystander and started acting like an enforcer in training, driving around with that faux official clipboard, parroting violations she didn't understand, speaking with the confidence of someone who believed consequences were for other families. She trespassed because she'd seen her mother do it. She recorded people's property because she'd seen her mother weaponize photos. She threatened to report anything she didn't like because she had grown up believing a report from a duke was the same thing as law. That was the poison running through Pine Ridge. Not rules, but entitlement. An entire structure built around one woman's need to control and one daughter's belief she had inherited the right to do the same. Every complaint that disappeared, every neighbor who suddenly decided to sell, every mysteriously escalating fine formed another brick in Karen's invisible fortress. But what she never understood was that fear isn't a foundation. It's a fuse. The more she abused it, the shorter it burned. And by the time Madison laid her hands on my RZR, by the time she walked into my garage like she owned it, by the time she performed her little queen-in-training routine without hesitation, that fuse had already reached the powder. Their power structure wasn't strength, it was pressure. And pressure always breaks the moment someone refuses to bow. Evidence is a quiet thing. It doesn't shout, it doesn't threaten, it doesn't care about titles, gossip, or the fantasies tyrants build around themselves. It just sits there, cold and patient, waiting for the moment it is finally allowed to speak. The night Madison stole my RZR, the night entitlement turned into crime, the night sirens cut through Pine Ridge's fake perfection. That was the moment evidence stopped being theoretical and became a weapon sharper than anything Karen had ever swung at this neighborhood. I didn't need to convince anyone. I didn't need to argue. All I needed to do was collect the truth and let it do what truth always does when lies have ruled for too long. Dismantle the story tyrants tell themselves about who they are. The The discovery started before the crash, before the shouting, before Karen's voice cracked under pressure. It started the second Madison stepped into my garage on camera. That little black eye above my front door that Karen once called unsightly modern clutter became the witness she could never silence. It recorded everything with merciless clarity. Madison crossing the property line, deliberately opening the garage, zeroing in on the magnetic key box like she'd memorized its location, stealing it, and walking out like she'd just claimed spoils from land she believed she owned. There was no confusion in her movements, no hesitation, no panic, just entitlement in motion. When I sat at my kitchen table later and replayed the footage frame by frame, there was no satisfaction, just confirmation. Every second of video was another nail sealing the narrative she and her mother had spun for years, and not one of those nails belonged to me. They hammered their own coffin with their own arrogance. I downloaded the video to every device I owned, backed it up on external drives, and uploaded it to cloud storage with redundant links because tyrants do desperate things when their fantasy kingdoms start to crumble, and I wasn't giving Karen a single chance to twist, threaten, or erase anything. Pam sat beside me in silence, the kind of silence that says everything. She didn't need to tell me to proceed carefully. She knew I already was. Discovery isn't dramatic, it's meticulous, it's patient, it's methodical. I printed screenshots with timestamps. I pulled stills of Madison stepping into the garage, of her hand taking the key, of her driving away in my RZR. I compiled call logs, incident reports, and the timestamp of the police dispatch. Every piece of it told the same unbroken story: trespass, theft, reckless endangerment, collision, arrest, no HOA spin, no misunderstanding, no wiggle room. Proof doesn't negotiate. But that was just the beginning. The deeper discovery came when neighbors finally realized they weren't alone. The crash wasn't just a physical collision, it was a social one. It shattered the illusion that Karen's power was harmless, that Madison's behavior was just teenage attitude, that the HOA's harassment was merely annoying instead of dangerous. The elderly man who'd been clipped that night gave his statement with shaking hands and steady eyes. His words carried more weight than Karen had ever expected. She nearly hit me. She didn't slow down. She was laughing before she could control. He had bruises to prove it. He had witnesses to support it. And those witnesses, once silent, were finally speaking. Phones came out that night, not to gossip but to record. Door cameras across the cul-de-sac captured the RZR's path. Street footage showed the exact moment the police lights flared behind her. Even people who had never wanted conflict started submitting clips, screenshots, and statements. Discovery spread through Pine Ridge like wildfire in reverse, revealing and exposing instead of burning. Every submission added a new angle, a new vantage point, a new confirmation that this wasn't a misunderstanding. It was a pattern. Karen's world depended on isolation, on making every resident feel like they were alone in their frustration, alone in their fear, alone in their resentment. Evidence destroyed that isolation in seconds. Suddenly, people weren't whispering individually. They were sharing openly. They were connecting stories. They were realizing how many times they had been lied to, fined unfairly, intimidated for no reason other than Karen's ego demanding tribute. It turned out Pine Ridge had been documenting itself for years without even trying. Emails, violation letters, recorded phone calls, photos of Karen trespassing, notes taped to doors like threats, a trail of proof stretching back further than even I expected. And the thing about tyrants is this: in trying to control everything, they leave fingerprints on every abuse they commit. Karen had signed everything, dated everything, printed her power across every page like a signature she thought meant untouchable. Now those same signatures built the case that would bury her presidency. Once discovery began, it was unstoppable. The bylaw books she'd twisted became the very ropes that tied her authority down. Her own words contradicted themselves. Her own memos exposed procedure violations. Her own votes lacked quorum. Her own inspections broke the rules she enforced on everyone else. Every piece of paper she had ever used as a weapon turned around and faced her. But the most devastating proof wasn't written or filmed. It was spoken by those she'd walked over for years. At kitchen tables, on sidewalks, in quiet conversations that finally became public. She threatened to fine us because we parked on the street overnight. She ordered me to take down my flag, then told her friends they could keep theirs. She told my wife she would make an example of us if we kept questioning her. Every sentence cut deeper than any document because they revealed motive, pattern, intent. Abuse isn't accidental when it repeats with the same target, same tactics, same sneer, and through all of it, Madison remained the clearest, loudest example of Karen's legacy. She was proof in human form. Proof of what happens when a child grows up watching power go unchecked. Proof of what entitlement becomes when it never meets consequence. Proof that HOA rulebooks in the wrong hands don't create order. They create tyrants in training. The discovery phase ended long before the meeting. It ended the moment Karen realized the truth couldn't be argued with anymore. There is a particular look people get when they understand that evidence has outrun their lies. A flicker of panic, a tightening around the jaw, a desperate calculation happening behind their eyes as they search for one more excuse that won't come. I saw that look the night of the crash. I saw it again at the meeting. I saw it when she realized she wasn't the one gathering proof anymore. She was the one being proven against. The irony was perfect. For years, Karen had hidden behind words like documentation, compliance, record, and procedure. Now those same words were the reason she couldn't escape. Discovery stripped away the pageantry. Proof stripped away the throne. There were no speeches she could make to erase the video. No rule she could twist to undo police reports. No faux authority tone that could out-talk the sight of her daughter sitting in the back of a squad car with tears replacing entitlement. She had built a world where she believed control came from speaking the loudest. Now that world collapsed because the truth didn't need to shout. It only needed to exist. And it existed everywhere, undeniable and complete, wrapped in timestamps, witness statements, camera angles, and the collective exhaustion of an entire neighborhood that had finally decided to stop pretending. Discovery didn't just expose what Madison did, it exposed who Karen had always been. And once proof lives in daylight, tyrants don't get to choose what burns. The day of the emergency HOA meeting didn't feel like a meeting. It felt like a trial that had been waiting years to happen, held not in a courtroom, but in the same community room Karen once used as her personal throne room. Chairs filled faster than I had ever seen. People who never attended anything HOA-related suddenly showed up early, not out of curiosity but out of something heavier, something sharper, something that looked a lot like long-delayed courage. There was no coffee table spread, no fake hospitality, no brittle small talk, just residents sitting shoulder to shoulder, eyes pointed toward the front of the room where Karen usually stood to lecture everyone about standards and expectations. Only this time, the room wasn't waiting for orders. It was waiting for a collapse. Karen walked in late, not because she was busy, but because she needed to make an entrance. She always did, except the effect wasn't the same anymore. The room didn't straighten up when she arrived. Nobody softened their voice. Nobody shrank in their chair. They just watched her. And being watched without control is the one thing tyrants never handle well. She scanned the room, searching for obedience, and finding only cold stares and folded arms. Her eyes landed on me, and in that second she knew the script she'd always relied on had already burned. Even before anyone spoke, the confrontation had begun. She tried anyway. Of course she did. She cleared her throat, lifted her chin, placed both hands on the podium like she had done 100 times before, and started to speak in that polished, condescending tone she'd perfected over the years. "We are here today," she began, "to address the unfortunate incident involving my daughter and the spread of misleading information that has damaged the reputation of this community. In the past, people would have let her finish. They would have swallowed anger to avoid a fine. Not anymore." A voice from the back cut clean through her sentence. "We're here because your daughter stole a vehicle and nearly ran someone over." The room didn't erupt. It didn't need to. The silence that followed was louder than shouting. A tightened, the tiny twitch she couldn't control flashing for just a second before she pasted her fake professionalism back into place. "There are legal nuances you don't understand," she snapped, already losing the calm she pretended to have. "And as HOA president, I will..." "You're not presiding over anything today," someone else said. Then another voice added, "Sit down and listen for once." It hit her then. Authority wasn't in her hands anymore. Control had shifted, quietly and completely, and she hadn't noticed until it was already gone. She tried to push forward anyway, talking over residents, insisting this was defamation and targeted harassment, stringing together words she'd abused for years. But every time she tried to dominate the room pushed back, calmly, firmly, relentlessly. When my turn came, I didn't stand for theatrics. I stood because the truth deserved to be upright. I didn't raise my voice, didn't deliver speeches, didn't mimic her drama. I laid out the facts exactly as they happened. The trespass, the key theft, the reckless driving, the crash, the elderly man knocked into the grass, the police reports, the footage. I explained chain of evidence, timestamps, procedures followed, statements filed. I didn't add venom. I didn't need to. The evidence spoke for itself, and Karen couldn't speak over it. I connected the dots further than she expected. How her years of intimidation normalized her daughter's behavior. How Madison wasn't a confused child, but the product of Karen's deliberate belief that rules only restrain other people. How this wasn't a single mistake. It was the inevitable result of unchecked power rotting a family from the inside out. Karen tried to interrupt. The room wouldn't let her. Residents who had once bitten their tongues turned around and told her, clearly and directly, to stop talking. The look on her face when her own community told her to be quiet was the beginning of the end. Then came the witnesses. The elderly man stood slowly, leaning on his cane, and described exactly how it felt to see a speeding RZR flying toward him, to be clipped and thrown sideways, while the driver laughed moments before losing control. His voice didn't shake from fear. It shook from anger that had ripened into resolve. Others followed. People Karen had silenced for years now spoke in a steady rhythm she couldn't break. They talked about the fines, the threats, the humiliation, the selective enforcement, the favoritism, the trespassing, the bullying. Every story peeled another layer off the authority she clung to, exposing not strength but desperation. Confrontation wasn't loud. It was overwhelming. It pinned her to the reality she'd avoided for years. The final blow came when the temporary board chair read the legal opinion confirming that Karen had violated multiple bylaws repeatedly, intentionally, and for personal benefit. Her titles, the very things she hid behind, now condemned her. They read every violation out loud, every date, every incident, every recorded abuse of power. Her name echoed again and again, not as Queen of Pine Ridge, but as the problem Pine Ridge finally chose to remove. Karen stopped pretending. The polished veneer shattered. She went straight to rage. She called everyone ungrateful, accused neighbors of conspiring, accused me of engineering the situation, accused the board of betrayal, accused the elderly victim of exaggerating. Every sentence dug her deeper. Every excuse exposed how incapable she was of accountability. She didn't see people. She saw threats to her ego. And then came the vote. No podium speech saved her. No glare intimidated anyone. No threat changed hands. People who had spent years shrinking under her stare raised their hands high, steady, and unapologetic. The motion to remove her as HOA president passed in an avalanche. The motion to bar her from ever holding a board position again rolled right behind it. For a moment she just stood there, eyes wide, breath shallow, lips parted like words had abandoned her. For the first time since I met her, Karen Duke had nothing to say. Public collapse isn't theatrical. It's quiet. It's the sound of power evaporating and leaving someone with nothing but who they really are. She wasn't a ruler. She wasn't a leader. She wasn't a protector of community standards. Without the illusion of authority, she was just another person who had spent years hurting people because she thought she could. Madison wasn't there, but her absence screamed as loudly as any presence could. The image of her in handcuffs lingered in every mind in that room. It was the perfect symbol of how far the Dukes had fallen, from self-declared royalty to defendants facing consequences they never thought would touch them. Karen didn't storm out. Storming requires confidence. She just left, shoulders hunched, eyes unfocused, movements small and uncertain, like a person waking from a long dream and not liking the world waiting on the other side. No one followed her. No one comforted her. No one told her it would be okay. The kingdom she imagined had never really existed, and without fear propping it up, there was nothing left standing. The confrontation was over. The collapse was complete, and there was no applause, no cheering, no dramatic victory speech. Just a room full of people who finally felt the weight lift from their chests, who realized how exhausting it had been to live under someone else's delusion for so long. Karen had spent years demanding attention. In the end, she left to the thing she hated most: silence. Karen always believed retaliation meant yelling louder, threatening bigger, and writing nastier letters covered in artificial authority. She thought domination was strategy, and intimidation was intelligence. But real retaliation, the kind that doesn't just sting but dismantles the very system a tyrant hides behind, is quiet, documented, and surgical. It doesn't throw punches, it removes foundations. After the public collapse, after the vote, after the room finally exhaled years of fear, I didn't feel triumphant. I felt focused. Because removing Karen from the throne she built out of paper didn't undo the damage she had caused, didn't erase the harassment residents endured, didn't fix the structural rot in the HOA she'd spent years poisoning. What came next wasn't revenge. It was repair by force of competence. The morning after the collapse, I woke before sunrise, not from anxiety, but from momentum. The evidence packages were already organized, the digital backups already secured, the timelines already written. Now they needed to be placed exactly where they would hit hardest, in the hands of people who don't care about HOA drama or Karen's theatrics, but who take abuse of authority, financial misconduct, and procedural violations very seriously. Expert retaliation starts with knowing who actually has jurisdiction. Karen had spent so long pretending she was the highest authority that she forgot there are levels far above her clipboard kingdom. I filed formal complaints with the state HOA regulatory board, submitted financial audit requests for Pine Ridge's dues accounts, and forwarded documentation of her bylaw violations to the property management company that had long turned a blind eye because dealing with her was easier than confronting her. They didn't get to be comfortable anymore. Every report was detailed, time-stamped, supported by footage, emails, signed letters, and witness statements. There were no emotional rants, no speculation, just facts lined up so cleanly that anyone reviewing them would see the same undeniable pattern: misuse of position, selective enforcement, hostile conduct, and a direct link between her abuse of power and the criminal behavior her daughter believed she could get away with. While those gears began to turn, another form of retaliation unfolded within Pine Ridge itself. The interim board, free for the first time from Karen's grip, called for full forensic accounting of HOA finances during her presidency. For years she had justified dues increases with vague phrases like beautification projects and necessary administrative costs. Now those words had to stand up to spreadsheets, receipts, and audit trails. And they didn't. Money allocated for community upgrades seemed to disappear into loosely defined reimbursements. Landscaping contracts magically favored companies with personal connections. Fees collected through aggressive fines had no transparent expenditure records. Every irregularity wasn't just a red flag. It was a billboard spelling out exactly how carelessly Karen had treated the community's funds. Expert retaliation is patient. It doesn't rush because it knows truth doesn't need to hurry to win. While the financial audit moved forward, I focused on making sure that what happened to me could never legally happen to another resident in Pine Ridge again. We rewrote bylaws with precision. We added clear language that prohibited board members from unilateral enforcement, from performing private inspections, from stepping onto resident property without written notice and consent. We installed checks, balances, and mandatory board votes for any disciplinary action. Karen had ruled through loopholes. Expert retaliation sealed them shut. Residents who had spent years feeling powerless suddenly found themselves part of the solution. They volunteered. They voted. They actually read the documents Karen used to wave over their heads as threats. The community that once felt like her private kingdom became exactly what she feared most: self-governed, informed, and no longer willing to be ruled by fear. Meanwhile, the legal system handled Madison. Charges weren't rumors anymore. They were real, printed, filed, and assigned case numbers. Theft, reckless driving, endangerment, property damage. Every count represented a shattered illusion she'd grown up believing, that her mother's authority extended beyond HOA meeting rooms and into law itself. It didn't. The day Madison walked into the courthouse, without the smirk she'd always worn, without the armor of entitlement, without the safety net of her mother's intimidation tactics, was the day consequence became permanent. But the most precise retaliation wasn't against Madison. It was against the legacy of fear Karen built. People began rescinding complaints they had made under pressure. They removed unfair fines from their records. They replaced letters of violation with written apologies from the new board, acknowledging that many actions under Karen were abuses of power. Her reign wasn't just ended, it was officially documented as wrong. That matters, because tyrants thrive on rewriting history, and expert retaliation locks history into place so they can't twist it later to make themselves martyrs. Karen tried, of course. She sent a few final emails dripping with self-pity and deflection, calling everything a witch hunt, blaming hostile residents, painting herself as the misunderstood protector of standards. But those emails bounced off the wall of reality built around her by evidence and community unity. No one replied with fear. No one rushed to soothe her ego. Some didn't reply at all. The silence was heavier than any argument could be. Expert retaliation doesn't scream. It replaces. It takes everything the abuser used as a weapon and turns it into something that protects the people they once controlled. That's what Pine Ridge became. The golf cart that was once a symbol of Karen's roaming surveillance became just a vehicle again, driven by volunteers delivering welcome packets that actually welcomed people instead of threatening them. The community meetings that used to be monologues turned into discussions. The bylaws once treated like scripture carved in stone became living documents written by the very people expected to follow them. And over all of it hung the story everyone knew, but didn't need to keep retelling. The queen of the neighborhood had lost her crown to the one thing she could never control: accountability, administered by someone who understood exactly how to apply it. In the end, expert retaliation wasn't about humiliation, even though humiliation found her anyway. It was about precision, permanence, and making sure no one like Karen ever rose in Pine Ridge again. She had ruled through fear. I answered with structure. She had built her power on intimidation. I dismantled it with process. She used threats wrapped in bureaucracy. I used bureaucracy to take away her ability to threaten. That's the difference between noise and expertise. One tries to scare you, the other makes sure you never have to be scared again. Victory doesn't always arrive with cheering, confetti, or some dramatic movie soundtrack swelling in the background. Morning light creeps into a room after a long night, slow and undeniable. That's what Pine Ridge Estates felt like in the days after everything ended. Not triumphant, not loud, just free. The kind of freedom you don't realize you've been missing until it finally returns, and you notice how deeply you've gotten used to holding your breath. The HOA notices stopped arriving, like threats disguised as memos. The patrol-like golf cart no longer idled in front of people's homes like a warning beacon. Conversations that once died whenever Karen walked by now continued openly on front lawns, neighbors leaning against fences they felt like they actually owned. The neighborhood didn't change physically. The houses were the same, the streets were the same, the trees were the same. What changed was the weight. It was gone, and when a weight that heavy disappears, the silence it leaves isn't empty. It's relief. Madison's case moved forward the way real law always does. No favoritism, no intimidation, no special treatment for self-proclaimed royalty. Court dates set, charges listed, conditions imposed. Her world, once made of loopholes and indulgence, became paperwork, probation officers, and consequences she couldn't scream her way out of. She stopped being the princess of Pine Ridge and became exactly what she never believed she would be. Just another person facing the results of her own actions. There were no crowds watching her now, no audience for entitlement, just a courtroom, a judge who didn't care who her mother used to be, and the unavoidable reality that the title, Karen's daughter, held no authority anywhere outside the boundaries of a neighborhood fantasy. As for Karen, she became a ghost in the very place she once dominated. People didn't fear her anymore, and that was worse for her than any fine, any title loss, any report filed against her. Fear had been her currency. Without it, she had nothing to trade, No one rushed to greet her. No one lowered their voice when she passed. Some people didn't even bother looking at her at all. Indifferent anger could ever be, and Pine Ridge served it to her without trying. She tried to file appeals, tried to argue that the vote wasn't fair, tried to threaten legal action in rambling emails that read more like tantrums than arguments. None of it went anywhere. The board didn't tremble. The residents didn't back down. Her power had never been real to begin with. It had only ever been borrowed from everyone else's willingness to be silent. Once that silence ended, so did she. The RZR sat in my garage again, repaired, restored, and finally untouched by unwanted hands. War. Oh, it should. Sometimes I'd start it just to hear her, not out of anger or defiance. Something rebuilt with patience and discipline will always have something propped up by arrogance. Back to our life. We went back to mornings without dread, to evenings without wondering what envelope might be taped to our door, to weekends spent working on projects because we wanted to, not because we were trying to prove a point to someone with a clipboard complex. The neighbors did the same. Kids chalked the sidewalks again. People parked without measuring the distance between tires and concrete, like they were in some bizarre compliance exam. Laughter returned to cul-de-sacs where it had once been replaced by whispered complaints and anxious glances. Pine Ridge finally felt like a neighborhood instead of a stage for someone else's delusion of power. That's what total victory is about here, claiming space where fear used to live. She just faded, her voice shrinking, her presence thinning, her relevance evaporating until she was nothing more than a about how bad things used to be. Eventually, rumors started that she was thinking about moving, but because she couldn't stand waking up every morning in a place that no longer bowed to her, whether she stayed or left didn't matter anymore. The throne she built on lines, threats, and fake authority. And it wasn't. There are no speeches at the end of something like this. No dramatic declarations. Just the sound of a garage door closing at night without worry. Of an end belongs to the person who built it. The low murmur of neighbors talking freely under porch lights. No one writes that into HOA bylaws, but it's the only rule that ever should have mattered. People deserve to live without fear in the homes they pay for. The Dukes forgot that. Pine Ridge remembered. And when it finally ended, it didn't end with shouting or fireworks. It ended the way real power trips do when reality finally touches them. It ended without ceremony. It ended without mercy. It ended in the one way that hurts tyrants more than anything else. HOA Karen went dead silent.